Hi, Suzanne. Hi. We're just waiting to sort something out with the internet. Doesn't appear to be working for people. That's why, nothing's happening.
Can I just ask members, are you all now managed to get online? Because I'm aware it's now 10 o'clock. In which case, I will simply say for those on the YouTube video, we may be a minute or so later starting, simply because we're having a few difficulties with changes to the Wi-Fi system within the boardroom. We'll be beginning momentarily. Thank you. Could I ask if any members having difficulty in logging in, can they please raise their hand and let Joe know?
Well, good morning, everybody. I'm pleased we're able to start, and welcome to Suzanne on the screen. Nice to see you. And we begin our usual authority meeting in the usual way with, well, actually, I'm not going to begin in the usual way. I'm going to start with a welcome, and not before I get to apologies. It seems more cheerful to start on a welcome note. And I'd therefore particularly like to welcome Juliet Bailey, who joins us for the first time as an independent Secretary of State member. So, Juliet, I just wanted to see if there's anything you'd just like to say by way of brief introduction.
Hello, lovely to be here, and I look forward to meeting you all properly later. So I'm Juliet. I have a legal background and I work in the charity sector, and I have a sheep small holding in the Peak District National Park. So hope to get as much insight and bring Peak District passion over to the Lake District.
The subject of sheep will come up actually quite soon on the agenda. You'll be interested to see it.
It does on most agendas.
Well, thank you very much, Juliet. And we're much looking forward to working with you. I'm very pleased that you finally arrived. It has been a rather tortuous process. So moving on from welcomes, and I should say welcome to you all if I haven't already. Turn to apologies. Helen, do we have apologies?
Well, it seems unfair to give Suzanne's apologies. She's there on the screen, but she has sent her apologies for not being able to attend in person.
Oh, well, I shall certainly regard this meeting then as pretty much a full house, which is very nice to see. So thank you all very much indeed for clearing whatever you had to clear in your diaries to be here this morning. Much appreciated. That takes us to looking at the minutes of the meeting that was held on the 10th of December. Is everybody happy with the minutes? I don't hear anyone speaking against the minutes. In that case, I will sign them as a correct record. That completed, we turn to the chair's announcements. As you'll be aware, we are live streaming the meeting this morning and also making a recording of the meeting. And particularly for Juliet's benefit, when you speak, please can you switch on your microphone? And even more importantly, when you finish speaking, try and remember to switch it off. If not, you'll see a frantic signal coming from my right, and that normally means we've left our microphones on. Don't think we have press here this morning, or do we have press here this morning? No. In that case, I will move on to remind everybody of the fire arrangements. We're not expecting a fire drill this morning, so if we do hear the fire drill, the alarm go, please take it very seriously. And as usual, you need to exit through the door on my left behind Juliet, and you walk round into the meeting point in the main car park. Certainly with the weather we're having, I certainly hope we haven't got a fire drill this morning, or at least it does seem to have finally stopped raining. Moving on then, just to say a few things about what I and various others have been up to under my chair's announcements. Most literally fresh in my mind is the opening of the Coast to Coast National Trail, or the launch, which was held in Emmerdale, as Peter and Rick will know, on Monday. Fortunately, it was Monday, not yesterday. Steve was there with various colleagues, and Steve Tatlock, who many of you will know, hosted the day along with Joe Wilmot, who was the National Park project ranger for the trail event. And credit to both of them and indeed the entire team for the work that they've done, which is very impressive. This was very much a partnership project, and it's one that I think we will be continuing to. Actually, if you can have a continuing launch, I'm not quite sure about that, Kevin. But I know you're attending part 2 of this event tomorrow. Yes, tomorrow in Yorkshire. And on Saturday, the VIP guests who we'd hoped would have been with us on Monday came because they couldn't manage the Monday date. So we had Baroness, it was Baroness Hayman, who sits in the Lords and takes an interest in DEFRA matters. And also we had Josh McAllister, who is one of the West Coast MPs, who some of you will know. And he's MP for...
what was the former seat around the Whitehaven area?
That's what's confused me. It's what? Whitehaven and Workington, thank you. Yes, my apologies to Josh if he's listening. Anyway, it was very nice that they could both be there, and they in fact actually I think saw the new trail being opened in sunshine. So it was nice that they were there, but they also found themselves being televised. So we had television on Saturday. There were cameras there on Monday, and I believe there are going to be cameras there tomorrow. So it's going to be on television on Thursday evening, and I presume that's going to be some form of local television. So an event worth watching. We had a National Parks England board meeting, as some of you will have seen from the mugshot picture and the snapshot last week, which we hosted here in the Lake District. And we welcomed Debbie Stockwell, who is the new Executive Director of National Parks England. You'll have seen also, I think, from information that was circulated, again, I think by a snapshot, has a very good background in working with DEFRA, amongst others. I don't know if, Sabina, you ever came across her? Different. So I think she's already making a very impressive start, and I think it's going to be a very good appointment. I hope I can say that with confidence, because I was actually one of the interview panel, and she did come across extremely well. So I think that's going to be a welcome addition to the National Park staff. The actual meeting itself, we had an update on Protected Landscapes Partnership, the Office of Environmental Protection on their Protected Landscapes project. And we also had a presentation from Rose O'Neill from the Council for National Parks on their research into the governance of national parks, which they've taken a keen interest in. And a report is due on the 20th of April. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of that. I mean, it's obviously it's a report that they're producing, I think, as far as I understand it, independently, but they've obviously got views that they want to put across about how they think national parks might be run in the future. So we watch that space with keen interest. And prior to that, last month, Gavin and I attended a workshop on governance in protected landscapes, and that was done on behalf of DEFRA, looking at a slightly different aspect. And that stems right back to the LURA that flagged up the need to look at some form of governance in national parks. What difference it's going to make, we don't yet know. But I think the focus is perhaps not so much on the actual structure of the boards themselves as to what our particular focus of activities should be, although there might be some thoughts about the structure of boards. Mary Cray, who's the current minister, I think takes a keen interest in that. So we'll keep you posted on that one. We also memorably said goodbye to 4 chief executives who all coincidentally were retiring at roughly the same time. Somebody added it up, and rather, I'm not quite sure if it's amazing or not, but they'd actually managed to, between them, serve 100 years as chief executives. So you've got some way to go, Gavin. So Gavin, having been one of the new boys 18 months ago,
Yeah.
is now one of the longest serving chief executives. It's just coincidence that it's obviously happened that way. So don't read anything into why 4 people have disappeared seemingly all at once. But I think what it will also do is bring some fresh ideas and fresh thinking into the group, and I think it should be really interesting. The appointments who've been made have got very impressive backgrounds and quite a mixed set of backgrounds. I think at least a couple have DEFRA backgrounds, but I suspect, Sabina, they're also, dare I say it, the next generation down. So we hope to have an opportunity of meeting them, I think, at various times. And Gavin certainly will get to work with them. And the other person that I hope you'll be able to meet, possibly before this, is we'd like to invite to an authority meeting, is Debbie Stockwell. So you can actually find out more about National Parks England, the work that they can do, and also give her the benefit of your thoughts on how we see the future of national parks. We're going to invite her to Glaramara, which we thought again would be a good opportunity to talk to her, because it's not just for her current role, but I think she'll be able to give us quite a lot of insight into her past experience. And you've also thought of inviting
Kat Hawkins, who's the Chief Executive of National Parks Partnerships. So again, we can explore the different purposes and roles of National Parks England and National Parks Partnerships as national bodies.
And if you're looking mystified by all this, Juliet, you won't be the only one. By the time we've been through, as Mark pointed out when he joined not long ago, the number of acronyms we use can be very baffling. And not just the acronyms, but even just the full name of some of these organisations and trying to understand how they all fit together. So if at any point it isn't clear, don't worry if you think it's a really simple question. It's probably the one that everybody's dying to ask. We've also been continuing our engagement meetings with MPs and mayoral candidates. We've met 2 so far. We met Libby Bateman and who was the other one we met? We met Mike Starkey. And we hope to meet David Allen next. And we still don't yet know, I think, who the 4th Reform candidate's likely to be. But we wanted to ensure that we had a good opportunity at an early stage of talking to them about the role of the national park. We've also got coming up the round of parish council distinctive area meetings. We brought those forward into being earlier in the year because we found that autumn perhaps isn't the ideal time to be trying to travel around Cumbria. So on at least one occasion, I think we were trying to get up to the west coast. The weather was so bad we had to resort to online. And one of the benefits, I think, of these meetings is that we actually meet people in person. So we'll be continuing with those. I don't know if the dates have been circulated for those parish council members or others. Have you?
I was just about to ask for them to circulate it.
So if they haven't,
I think the only delay is I think we're looking to confirm the venue and date for one of the sessions. So once we've got them all, they'll go out imminently.
So we'll make sure that everybody knows what the dates are. So any member who's able to come would be very welcome, and particularly those people, obviously, whose patch we're coming into. And I think it would be advantageous, obviously, if we have a word with you in advance about any likely topics or any particular things that you would like us to cover that you'd also find helpful. So I think you've probably picked that up, Suzanne. I can see you nodding on the screen as well. So, I think otherwise, I think most of the other things I've been involved with are coming up on the agenda today, so I won't take up any further time. But thank you all for that. And if you've got Thank you. Yes, it wouldn't be a meeting if I hadn't forgotten something I was early in the meeting I'm meant to be doing. And as ever, Julie has kindly reminded me. I shall be stepping down, as you know, as the chair in June, and so we will be holding elections once again, as we do on an annual basis, for the chair and deputy chair. As there are a number of new or newish members, Julie quite rightly thought it'd be helpful if we just reminded people what the protocols are for running those elections.
So not less than 10 working days before the committee meeting in June, at the annual meeting, you will receive an email asking for nominations to be submitted in writing. The nomination must be seconded, and if you wish, you can include a statement of no more than 100 words outlining the candidate's relevant skills and experience. Nominations must be submitted to the Chief Executive's nominee, me, at least 5 clear working days before the annual meeting, and then at least 2 days before the meeting we will send another email saying who the candidates are and providing copies of the resume if it has been received. At the meeting itself, the Chief Executive will preside for the first item of business. We'll declare the nominations closed, and I will announce the valid nominations which have been received. If we have only received 1 nomination for chair and 1 nomination for deputy chair, they will be automatically appointed. If there are more than 1, then there will be a ballot, and I will be responsible for counting the votes. So you will receive emails. You will receive instructions in those emails reiterating what I've said, but that's just as a heads up so that you know if you are seeking to be nominated or wish to nominate or second somebody, there is a process that you need to go through. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions on that? No. Thank you very much indeed, Julie. That was very helpful. That takes us on then to declarations of interest. Has anybody got things that they need to declare as an interest? Nope. Item 5, any questions we need to be dealing with today? And the answer to that is no. But we do have public participation. And Julie is going to read out a statement that's been received from the chair of the Swaledale Sheep Breeders Association with regard to concerns about the predation by sea eagles. And then I will read the authority's response.
The email reads, first, I would like to thank you for attending the meeting at Junction 36 on behalf of the National Park. It was also good to see Jane Saxon there from the National Trust. However, it was extremely disappointing that Lifescapes declined the opportunity to engage with a packed room of very concerned farmers and present their own case instead of leaving it to Abby Teward from the NFU. It was also extremely disappointing that no other members of the steering group were present either. It was clear from the presentations, both online and given in person by Ricky Rennie, that in parts of the west coast of Scotland, very, very significant predation of sheep, not just lambs, has been occurring on some farms over a long period of time. Anyone present could be in no doubt about the truth and validity of these claims, plus the scars on the face of Ricky Rennie's dog after being attacked by a sea eagle. As Ricky Rennie confirmed, the Scottish Government, Nature Scotland and RSPB Scotland are aware and accept that in certain circumstances sea eagles do predate sheep. There seems to be a narrative being spun that sea eagles predominantly eat fish, but from evidence given the other evening, there was 1 nest site where out of 20 bits of prey examined at the nest site, only 1 was fish. In the interest of factual accuracy, I should point out that this particular nest site did not have sheep remains, but as has been pointed out by Lifescapes themselves, some nest sites can have up to 30% of prey items being sheep meat. I was personally struck that on those farms that do suffer sea eagle predation, had sheep not been there, what level of destruction of other species would have been taking place. In the Lawton Valley in the Lake District, there is a FIPL-funded project called the Melbrake Curlew Recovery Project, aimed at bringing aiming at helping to bring back curlews, what effect and damage could a marauding sea eagle do to that area? Which brings me to the University of Cumbria survey. Did that survey look at potential fish stocks in the various lakes? Did it look at red listed species that might be put at risk? Did it do a comprehensive survey of all numbers of potential prey species and potential for predation of such as the curlews or even the now famous ospreys at Bassenthwaite? If not, it has been a very unprofessional and incomplete survey. Did it look at the potential impacts on hill sheep farming, given that sheep farming is so prevalent in the lakes, or did it just look at potential nest sites and general food availability? Are the coastal waters around West Cumbria deemed as a suitable food source? What are the makeup of fish species and at what water depth do they live? A further area of concern to me and other farmers is the way the survey results are being spun and put out in press releases and stories suggesting 78% of Cumbrians are supportive. We are also aware that presumably Lifescapes are supplying this information to parish councils, but as said earlier, would not come to present their own case to a farmer meeting. If you look at the mail drop that was sent out, approximately 21,500 households, there was less than 10% of people responded, just over 1,900 if I remember, with 285 against. So the figures could easily and legitimately be presented as out of over 21,500 surveys sent, only around 8% were in favour, which puts a completely different slant on the figures. Given the mail drop contained no mention of possible sheep predation, it was a completely misleading questionnaire and highlights what many farmers are now thinking, that this is all very underhand. It must be remembered that the Lake District is a World Heritage Site and that the reason it became a World Heritage Site is hill farming. Without hill farming, there would not have been a World Heritage Site. So are the park going to carry out the necessary heritage impact assessments, and if so, when? We would be grateful for an answer on this as soon as possible. The park must also be aware that if this project were to go ahead and there is significant predation of sheep flocks, just what sort of bad publicity and backlash could be expected? That is, without the, perish the thought, issue of pet dog being attacked. I would be grateful if this letter is forwarded to be read out at the next board meeting and that it is forwarded to the steering group, signed by Mr Cockbain, acting on behalf of the Swaledale Sheep Breeders Association.
Thank you very much, Julie. And this is the response to Will. Thank you for your email dated 27th of February 2026. As you are aware, the authority's key role on the White-tailed Eagle Steering Group is to support the facilitation of engagement with stakeholders, including farmers, and contribute to the process to learn whether the reintroduction of this species is possible or not. Any decision as to whether reintroduction should occur or not can only be made once it is understood if it is feasible and supported by the community. Currently, no decision has been taken to progress the reintroduction, and members will be involved in that decision for us. The steering group is following those processes set out by the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, IUCN, in their species reintroduction guidance. Such processes include 1. An assessment of the suitability of the landscape for white-tailed eagles. This has concluded the landscape is suitable with adequate wild food provision. 2. An assessment of the community social acceptance. An assessment of the community's social acceptance towards reintroduction. For this, the steering group has commissioned a social feasibility study to try to gauge public opinion as to whether this species should be reintroduced or not. For our part, we have tried hard to ensure that the consultation exercise has been extensive and inclusive, particularly to ensure voices from the farming community are heard. Appreciating that there are serious concerns from some, hence our officers' attendance at the Junction 36 event. The project is now seeking further feedback from stakeholder organisations, including those representing farming and land managing interests, and this is to be welcomed. Alongside other sheep associations and the NFU, I understand the Swaledale Sheep Breeders Association has been contacted directly to contribute further to this consultation. The authority is also sponsoring further engagement, supporting the steering group to meet with farmers and land managers to explore if and how a coexistence plan could be collectively created, establishing what, if any, measures and responses could satisfactorily address concerns raised by stakeholders. And we anticipate this to be completed by the end of June 2026. 3, and I'm nearly finished. The final stage includes an appraisal of the likely ecological impact of white-tailed eagles. This will help the project understand its impact on protected sites and species. Concerns about curlew, osprey and freshwater fish have been passed to the project team and will be included in the ecological impact assessment. Given that we are a World Heritage Site, a Heritage Impact Assessment is also being prepared, which, amongst other elements, will include an assessment of an impact on upland hill farming as it relates to the features of the World Heritage Site. I know you have personally offered to review the first draft, and this is to be warmly welcomed. The completed Heritage Impact Assessment will be available by the end of April 2026. So that concludes the statement that Will wished us to read out and our response. And our response will be sent, if it hasn't already, to Will Cotby. Thank you, Julie, for reading out the statement from Will. That then takes us on to the appointment of members, and a great relief, as I said at the outset of the meeting, to report the appointment of Miss Juliet Bailey as Secretary of State, as it says here, brackets, national member, to fill the vacant position. So, welcome. And which moves us to the Chief Executive's update. Over to you.
Thank you, Tiffany, and thank you, members. You'll have noted quite a lot of content in the Chief Exec's update on this occasion here at Authority, so I'll resist the urge to regurgitate or overrun all that content again, or even go through each point in any meaningful way. Instead, I'll focus on a couple of things. Firstly, the headline item on the Chief Exec's update, which is confirmation of DEFRA's grant for the forthcoming year. Very, very welcome indeed to have received that in advance of the start of the financial year and to allow us to set our budget later today with some certainty. Welcome as well in general the nature of that settlement. Certainly a better position than we perhaps anticipated we would be in when we looked at things in the autumn. The revenue funding is of course still flat cash, so in real terms a cut, so disappointing, but at least it isn't a cash cut. What is much more welcome, and we genuinely appreciate the move in this direction from DEFRA on two fronts, is the allocation of capital, both for this year and an indication of capital grants for the second and third years of this settlement, and an agreement of a 3-year settlement itself, albeit with the second and third years being indicative. So overall, warmly welcome the fact that we've had confirmation of our grant, and overall that the package is better than we envisaged it would be when we were setting the MTFS back in November. The only other thing that I'd like to add before opening it up to questions on any of content in the report or indeed any other matters was to cover at least one item that isn't picked up insofar as it happened after the production of the report, which was we've had our annual review meeting with DEFRA. So the National Audit Office picked up a few years ago that there was a need for DEFRA to strengthen their monitoring around the grant funding that they provide to protected landscapes and national park authorities. So for a number of years, as part of the monitoring and evaluation of our grant, we have an annual meeting where the DEFRA team, led by the Deputy Director responsible for protected landscapes, Gabrielle Edwards, who you all met at Glaramara, and her wider team, sit down with each of the 10 English national parks and review progress over the last year. This year's annual review meeting happened a little under 2 weeks ago with myself and Steve and Hannah present alongside the DEFRA team. It explored the Lake District's contribution to the Protected Landscapes Targets and Outcomes Framework, so those national measures that government hold us to account against. It explored our progress on delivering for community and for place and World Heritage Site. It explored our contribution to 30 by 30, and it also had a little bit more of an in-depth exploration of our financial situation, both our financial resilience and crucially the use of the capital grant that DEFRA gave us in the 25-26 year. Overall, I think it's honest to say that DEFRA were left very impressed, very pleased with the work that the Park Authority had undertaken and the achievements and the delivery over the last year. And the only takeaway on the financial side is they are acutely aware of the financial position and strain that national park authorities are under. They are pleased that they were able to offer us capital over the forthcoming years, and they view it as a good settlement for national park authorities. There was an understanding of how and where we had deployed the capital grant that was given in the 25-26 year, and that it had principally been used around efficiency measures and income generation and support for a pre-existing capital programme. I guess it's fair to say there was also a bit of an indication that DEFRA would hope to see and expect to see, given that there is more notice and that this is a 3-year programme of capital funding that's coming forward now, they would expect to see a bit more balance. It wasn't a criticism of how we used the capital over the last year. They understand fully the drivers for that, but they expect to see a little bit of balance across the capital grant in the coming years so that it's used to both increase our financial resilience and drive income generation and other sources of funding for the Park Authority, but also more of it is used to directly support nature recovery and the delivery of 30 by 30. So that's something that we need to be conscious of as we develop our capital programme over the coming years. Beyond that, a very positive meeting, and as I say, I'm convinced DEFRA left very pleased and impressed with the progress made by the Park Authority, the board, the officers, the entire team over the last year. At that, Tiffany, I'll probably close my own remarks and invite questions on any topic of the report, or indeed any other matters that members would be interested in exploring.
Any questions or comments? Sally.
Thank you. I've got a couple of things. But first, with the letter to Mary Cray that you mentioned about housing and second homes, did we receive a copy of that? And if not, can I request one? I'm not sure if other members
We
do.
haven't circulated across the wider membership, but we can do. Sally absolutely will do so. It was a letter to Baroness Taylor as opposed to Minister Cray, because it went to MHCLG, the Ministry for Housing Communities, Local Government, who would lead on housing policy. And in effect, it was a restatement of the position that's gone to MHCLG in previous letters and the position within the partnership plan around support for exploration of change of use class. But by all means, we'll circulate that letter.
Because it's useful for the parish council to be able to report to parish councils on that. Yeah.
No problem. We'll get that distributed after this meeting, Sally.
Thank you. Services and the visitor services review. You mentioned that visitor services update in point 3. Obviously, it's quite topical in my ward. So any update on provision of information services on the visitor services review, please? So
on the visitor services review, the intention is still to bring a paper for consideration to members at September's authority. That's still what we're working towards. I know that can feel a little while off, but when you look at the deadlines for production of committee papers and the democratic cycle, when you've got the options of effectively left the options of September and June, trying to produce something for June's authority wouldn't be feasible. So that kind of leaves September's authority as the next available option, Sally. So that's what we're working towards on the wider review. On the localised issue relevant to you and the Keswick Information Centre, we are having some really quite productive conversations with a couple of locations that could host some information service provision over the coming summer season. I can't say much more in the public domain in terms of where they are and who they are, because those discussions are ongoing. But if you want to grab me at the end of the meeting, I might be able to reveal a little bit more on where we're up to with those discussions, Sally. But they are quite positive and we're quite pleased with how they're going.
Mark.
a comment and maybe a little question. Just about the second homes and holiday lets. It was about the use class change that proposed in England. Interesting, Wales is a little bit ahead of us on this, and they recently had one of their councils had an Article 4 challenged and put back, but there was a bit of a kickback from the community, which was quite interesting. You know, the further thoughts about that, people are saying that it affects the property values, they can't do anything, and it kind of like affects the tourism industry. So if it ever comes to the point where we do get like use class change and we put an Article 4 in, obviously we'll have to do quite a bit of community consultation, I would think, because that's something I hadn't thought about community kicking back, because normally you assume everyone's totally in support of it, but maybe not necessarily the case as it was in Wales. And my question, Steve, the parliamentary group you went on about World Heritage Site status, I've always thought that sometimes one day there might be a little bit of conflict between nature recovery, that kind of thing, versus World Heritage Site status, because possibly the very things that are attributes of World Heritage Site status may be slightly different to what nature recovery would ask. At these groups, do you think that's something they might talk about sometime? It might not be a problem at the minute, but going 5-10 years in the future, obviously some of those things we can't really get our cake and eat it on both of them.
Yeah, many thanks. So if I look at the World Heritage first, so the topics for the APPG are set by MPs themselves. They decide what they wish to talk about, but certainly we have indicated that a good topic would be nature and culture. So it's for them to work through if that is something of interest, and they'll take it forward. What I would say is that you'll appreciate we're already experiencing that particular challenge as identified through the comments from the World Heritage Committee. So we are very active and we're in discussions with DCMS and DEFRA as to how you can reconcile where there is that polarisation. And I would have to say probably we're in that leading place of trying to work through how on earth one does manage nature recovery in a cultural landscape. So that is something that we're working with. We're working also with ICMOS on that, because there is a tendency for World Heritage Committee to view the sites as dependent upon whether they are a nature or a culture designation. And we are trying to say, well, actually, let's not see them as pure, but you need to take forward the agenda relevant to the place and security and sustainability. So I will definitely keep you informed on that one. In terms of second homes and holiday lets, certainly I would be expecting if government were to come forward with the notion of introducing a change of use, that would have to be significant consultation locally and understanding as to how that would work. And that is something that certainly I know CALC, Cumbrian Association of Local Councils, are very keen to look at and explore with us if it ever were to come about.
Thank you. I think they're good questions. And I read the same piece. It was on the BBC website yesterday, wasn't it? Yeah, and it was also interesting to see the reasons at least were given in that article as to why some of the locals were opposed to it, and also the reason why it was overturned, which is also worth looking at. So technical, yeah. Jessie.
Gavin, could you say something about how young people are actively involved in the priorities?
In the development of the partnership plan, Jackie, or in?
Yeah, just generally.
So certainly they were targeted in parts as we developed the partnership plan. There was a dedicated elements of the consultation programme to seek young people's views. In terms of engagement with the wider authority agenda, I know it's something that's been under discussion between me and Tiffany since the UK National Parks Conference last September or so. And we are keen, and I've been having a look at what other national park authorities do in terms of having shadow boards and co-opting younger voices onto the boards. And really that's something that we do want to start to have a discussion with you as members and have a look at in the coming months, really, because there is with absolute respect. There is a certain demographic around our board table, and how we involve and engage young people in decisions that affect them in the national park, I think, is really important, and we need to do a little bit more. So I know Tiffany's recently set me that challenge of learning from some of the national park authorities and starting to think about how we can get more youth voices directly involved in decision making, or at least in the discussions that lead to decision making here at a board level and across the partnership.
I didn't ask Jackie to make the point or ask the question, but it was actually very helpful. But no, it is something I asked Gavin to particularly focus on, because I do think we need to do more. And some of the other parks have actually found good, useful ways, I think, of involving the younger voices. Nothing to suppose that there's anything wrong with the voices currently sitting around the table, but I think it is a question of looking at next generations. Will?
Just on the subject of that, we was at a tourism meeting, and Bray, they obviously do a lot with the youth. So maybe engaging with a local provider that already engages with that youth group.
That's a good suggestion. Thank you. Will?
Yeah, just with reference to the SVMG, look at the action plan for the season, which I trust will almost be finalised. I just wondered where you were with that and when we'll find out, because I know Easter is fairly imminent and over the first pressure we'll be feeling.
Yeah, many thanks, Will. So we have a meeting of SVMG Gold this Thursday, Will, when we should be hopefully getting feedback from the various tactical groups on the action plan. So I would be liking to very much tie it down then. I do know that there is already activity planned for the Easter period, and again, probably following Thursday, I can drop members a note as to what we intend to do for the coming period, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. I look forward to seeing more detail on that. And I'd just like to say, Gavin's powers of Nostradamus. He wrote this paper in 2016, according to my copy, anyway.
I've always been blessed with foresight, Will. What can I say? If not typing skills.
I think you win the prize, Will, for reading the papers most carefully for this meeting, I think. Well spotted, thank you. Sally, and then Pete.
Chair, can I refer back to the reintroduction of the white-tailed eagles? Can I make a comment on that, please? It's just a general comment, is that the public and parish council consultation on that has taken place before the ecological impact study. Therefore, it's a bit flawed in how people can respond to it. And that's the comments that I've been getting from people in parish councils, is we sort of feel we've got to stay neutral because we haven't got the information on how to proceed, because there's no ecological impact information yet. So will there be another consultation round after that, which makes it a bit long drawn out? But is that the proposal? Because at the moment the consultation,
that's a good point,
isn't at the right time.
I'm looking to my left. Don't answer that one.
No, it's a really good point, Sally, and certainly one that we are making to the steering group, appreciating we are one member of that steering group and we're not the lead member. So we do try to ensure that the steering group members are aware of community concerns and indeed the lack of information that should be made available or could be made available to assist the consultation. We are submitting a further request for additional information in the short term. Now, whether that will enable the steering group to agree another consultation period, in truth, is dependent upon that steering group. My fear, and why I say that, is because it is for the steering group to follow the IUCN consultation process. They have followed that to the letter. It might not be ideal for us, in truth, and that's what we are trying to say to the steering group. It is for them to decide, though, ultimately.
So
International Union of I'm going to look to
I've got
Tiffany,
it. I've got my notes.
only because we referred to it earlier.
It's the International Union for the Conservation of Nature.
So just if you do need member support on commenting on that, please come to me, because I've been at meetings where that's been raised as an issue, and I think it's really valid issue.
I think Steve, and I think we could ask Steve to actually raise that point and pass it on to the steering group, because I think it's a point well made.
I just reiterate something though that Tiffany raised in her response to the Swaledale sheep, in that for us, any decision on whether we support whitetail eagle reintroduction will have member involvement. It's important for us on that.
It's an important topic for it not to be considered very carefully.
And again, just for further clarity, if this is necessary, that will then determine the authority's position on reintroduction, but we are only one party within a steering group.
Yeah, and as Steve said, we're not the lead party on this either. Peter, thank you. Sorry, you do not have enough time. Okay, right. Anything else that Gavin's report? If not, thank you. It's obviously a report that generates a lot of interest this time, and I think also reflects two important things. One, inevitably how much work goes on and what the ground that Gavin and his colleagues are covering, and also perhaps some of the confidence that some of the government departments are showing in the Lake District National Park Authority that we're involved with things like the Pathfinder, which is good. So thank you for Gavin. That takes on then to the committee reports. National Parks England, there are two sets of minutes, and if anyone's got any questions, I'll sort of try to update you on where we are with National Park England matters earlier. If not, the Lake District National Park Partnership, and Peter.
I won't go through the minutes, but very happy to answer any questions that anybody has on the partnership papers.
Nope. I think it is just worth saying that I think the recent partnership meeting, which I missed, was last week, which I gather went very well.
Yes, if you'd like me to do.
Well, just very briefly.
Yeah, it was the meeting in which we covered the feedback on the partnership plan that had been received from communities and partners and stakeholders, and in which we discussed any minor changes to the objectives and actions, and in which we discussed the detail of the actions for the next coming couple of years. And it was a very productive and very constructive meeting. And yeah, I look forward to being able to present the final plan at the next authority meeting for a final approval. Good.
Thank you, Peter. Very helpful. Everybody, I hope everybody was nodding in the same direction. Right, so that takes on to minutes committees, resources committee. Jim.
Thank you, and my thanks to Peter for chairing that meeting for me while I sunned myself in Lanzarote. So I'm happy to present the minutes. Of course, if there are any difficult questions, I'll refer them to my left or right. Happy to take any questions.
Any questions? Nope. That takes on to park strategy and vision. That's back to you, Peter.
Again, don't propose going through everything, but happy to answer any questions if anybody wants to check anything in the minutes.
Thank you. Jackie, in the governance committee.
Yeah, thank you. So the governance minutes from the 25th of September 25, external audit of 24-25 accounts substantially complete. The auditor's annual report was presented with one improvement recommended around forecasting accuracy. And management has accepted this. Members agreed to note the reports and authorised me to sign the accounts and the letter of representation subject to final assurance with delegated authority for any final amendments if required. On the internal audit, good progress has been made, no new recommendations, and the committee noted overall progress on audit actions and governance improvements. Any questions?
Thank you very much. Any questions? Nope, thank you, Jackie. And Mark, Development Control Committee.
These are the minutes for the December and February Development Control Committee meeting. You'll note there's no one for January because that's the only month we don't have to do it. We get a holiday in January, and I'm delighted to say we're getting 2 new members onto the Development Control Committee meeting. So that's it's probably the busiest committee, but it's possibly the most rewarding as well. So thank you to the new members coming on. And then I wait all the questions.
Thank you. Any questions? For Juliet's benefit, so that's quite a sort of whiz through an awful lot of the parks business that's been done, but it is an opportunity for people just to keep in touch with what the other committees are doing. But as you'll have seen in the paper later in this meeting, we'll be looking at reviewing 1 or 2 aspects of that, which will obviously affect the way in which we report to authority. So thank you all. That takes us to member representation on outside bodies and partnerships. Has anybody got anything they wish to update us on? No. That nicely takes them through to item 13, appointment of members to serve on committees. The paper has been presented this time because we particularly wanted to ask the authority to approve the appointments of Jackie Lancaster and Jenny Burke to the Development Control Committee, and Juliet Bailey to the Resources Committee. And there won't be any further changes until committee appointments until the 24th of June, although the 24th of June will be on us, I fear, before we know it. But it was just so that we could ensure that the new members could start with their new committees. Is everybody happy with that? So that recommendation is approved. Thank you. That then takes us on to the 2026-2027 business plan. And over to you, Gavin.
Thank you again, Tiffany. More members will see before them a paper presenting our proposed business plan for the forthcoming year. Obviously, a lot of hard work goes into the production of the plan from the officer team and from members alike. The plan before you, I think, is a sound and realistic reflection of the discussions we had at Glaramara around members' priorities and areas where they wanted to see progress made. We believe it's a realistic representation of what the authority can do to advance and progress the emerging partnership plan. And we think it's stretching but realistic in terms of both the resources that the authority has and the powers and statutory functions at its disposal. I think there's some opportunity to have a discussion around format in this introduction, because this is quite a different format to the business plans of recent years. And obviously, as we get to questions, I think the most important thing is to discuss the content and have a substantive discussion around the content. But before we do, I think it is worth just pausing and reflecting on the change in content. Previously, members who've served on the authority for a number of years will know we used to have much broader actions and then milestones underneath them. We've had quite a switch now, and effectively it's a much more focused 1-year business plan with those milestones effectively elevated to action level, so you can start to see the individual actions that we propose to take. I think it's clearer in its format, and I certainly think it'll make monitoring and evaluation and progress much more straightforward in Resources Committee meetings going forward. I think it also resolves one of the difficulties we've faced over recent years, which is where you've got a broad action with a number of milestones underneath it, and 1 or 2 of those milestones go off track. You've then got a bit of an officer assessment going on whether we should be saying the whole action's off track or just the milestones. I think this clarifies that. So I certainly welcome the layout, and I'd like to thank Ben and Catherine, and I believe Peter as well, in terms of the initial conversations around that, but the discussion at Resources Committee that helped to refine that as well. That move to more granular level actions, though, has created one hiccup that we'll want to resolve over the forthcoming year that I just want to have a nod to into my introduction. Members will recall we used to give a reasonable estimate of the revenue cost of the headline actions in the business plan in pounds, effectively in a monetary value. When we've moved to more granular actions and more of them in the business plan, but more clear and more measurable, what that has done, given that it happened quite late in the day just after Christmas, it started to move the business plan away from the architecture of our financial system and how we manage our money. And it's much harder to put a monetary value against these more granular actions. That's not how our financial systems and our budget setting processes particularly work. So what we've tried to do to retain a measure of the relativity of the actions or the scale of the actions is to put the full-time equivalent staffing hours alongside them. It is a reasonable proxy measure, but please, as members, don't get too bogged down in that. It was something that we had to adopt because we couldn't put that same financial measure in, and we wanted to give you an idea of the scale and the relativity of it. But of course, it's a forecast and an estimate, and as much as I wish to claim to be Nostradamus, as Will pointed out earlier, these are based on service plans where staff are having an estimate and a forecast of where they intend to spend their time next year and over the forthcoming year. Obviously, it's a very loose proxy measure at this stage. What Pete and I want to do, and Ben want to do over the coming months, and we committed at Resources Committee to returning with a paper later in the year in that, is have a look at how we can best marry the architecture of our financial systems with business plan actions, so we can get back to trying to give a clearer estimate of what the financial cost of each action is. Beyond that, Tiffany, as I say, I think it's a reasonable reflection of discussions at Glaramara. I think it's a reasonable reflection of what the authority can do with its own power, its own land and its own resources to progress the partnership plan. And happy to take questions on the content, although I suspect Jim may also want to say a few words about the debate that was the very robust and full debate that we had at Resources Committee around the draft business plan about 6 weeks or so ago.
Thank you, Gavin. As usual, you've said most of what I was going to say, so I'll try not to repeat too much, but I would like to thank Ben for the change of format. And a lot of work went into that. I know a number of people chipped in along the way, and we had a good discussion in resources, so thank you. We do recognise that an overall quantification of the value of the actions is still not right, but it's work in progress. And the other thing we recognise is we've lost the multi-year view. And both those things we want to reflect on as we go through this year. But my personal feeling is this gave us a much clearer, crisper view of the actions we've underway. Now, in terms of the content of the plan, I have to say, given the size of our organisation, over 50 actions, some of them quite material, I think the scale and the ambition of the plan is challenging. I think that was recognised in our discussion in resources, and hopefully, as Gavin said, it does align with our earlier discussions. So very supportive, but also very happy to hear any feedback, and we will continue to monitor it through resources meeting or committee. Thank you.
Thank you. So that opens the way for any questions or comments.
Just one, it would, especially for being a new member, to have an indication of what last year's figures were and whether we achieved them and all the rest of it, to just see whether these are realistic figures. I think the reports, there's a lot of information on there, and to obviously absorb that, just so you've got some sort of indication.
Is that the sort of figures in terms of the resource or estimated staff days, Jackie, or do you mean progress on delivery of the actions of last year? Yeah, that's a valid point, because of course the two things operate on a slightly different cycle. Obviously, we will be bringing a business plan outcome report to committee or to authority, again depending on discussion later today, but effectively an outturn report on the business plan later in the year. Because of course, doing so at this point, I know it's desperately close, but we haven't actually concluded the business plan, but I do think that's something that we could reflect on. I'm keen to respect members' wishes to not have really voluminous agenda packs, and of course what we would be doing if we did it in the most basic way, we'd be bringing that draft performance report on this year's business plan alongside the proposed business plan for next year. I'm not sure members would welcome that given the volume of paper, but what we maybe need to do is do a summary table of how many actions are on track, whether the red, amber and green, and then do an exception report of those that we are projecting will be amber or red at the end of the year, the reasons why. That's certainly something that we could probably pick up for next year then.
So even if it was a column on your where you've got your 2025 26 to 30 31, just if there was an extra column in there of where you're up to so far.
Yeah, we have our quarterly performance report as well, which currently goes to Resources Committee. So if we move forward with our governance arrangements, they'll be coming to authority. So you'll get that in the version which Resources gets it, and with the new plan, we'll be looking to adapt that to reflect as well.
It's a good example of why we've been reflecting on the governance changes and actually just thinking about what authority members were in the picture about, and where authority members should perhaps have a voice that they haven't had because of the current previous arrangements. So it's always very difficult to get it absolutely right. You're never going to win each time, but you raise a good point. Sabina, I think you wanted to
I think Ben made my point for me, except of course that the way I recall it working resources is we would see the Q3 report at the point where we agree in the business plan, which I thought was fine, to be fair, being on resources, because you can see if stuff is going amber and red at Q3 and you can look for what it's doing on next year's business plan. And it's one way of getting right the timing, but I think, yeah, as they come together as a sector authority, I think that should work.
And in truth, let's have a little pause and reflect and not come up with a solution exactly here, but in truth, we're in a position to do something a bit beyond the Q3 report, because obviously as an officer team, we're reporting on these actions internally on a monthly basis. So actually we'd be all the way up to period 11 that we could produce at this point in the year, rather than period 9 as it was reported to Resources Committee last time. So I think there is just something on that bit of a stock take before you approve the next business plan of what the projected outturn for last year's, the current year as we sit now, business plan is. I think that is worthwhile looking at. And yes, you're right, Sabina, the simple thing would be, yes, it's that Q3 report, but in truth we could probably, well, we could bolt on a couple of months extra update. And at this stage you can well imagine we've got a pretty good idea of what all those actions are going to outturn in terms of red, amber and green status.
Peter.
Thank you, Tiffany. Just talking about the format. So I proposed this format after the last meeting because I just thought it would be a simpler, or a version of this format. I think it would be a simpler and easier to understand for members. And I'd just like to say thank you to the officers, Ben, Pete and Gavin, indeed, for really being open to that proposal and making it better and taking it forward and not being resistant to it in any way. So thank you for that.
You've got anything else they want to say? Graham.
Just a couple of points. How resilient is the plan for ad hoc changes to the environment that hit us? I'm thinking in particular of the Visitor Information Centre review and also the Windermere Gateway being shelved. Those are all both listed here to a certain extent, but do we just ride those bumps in the road, or does it need review?
So depending what happens later on in the agenda, obviously the current process is we bring regular updates, effectively reports on progress on the business plan to the Resources Committee. If we go ahead with proposed changes today, that would be to Authority Committee, we'd be bringing updates. But we have an existing process where alongside those performance updates, if we need to make changes to the business plan, we bring them and propose them as well. So if we need to remove actions, add actions as the year goes on, the officer team will bring them to members for approval as the year goes on.
Thank you. Graham, the way I see it working is we would turn those actions red, and I'd want them to be red so everybody saw that Windermere Gateway had stopped. That's a big impact on our housing target. If we get mitigating actions that recover the position, then we've agreed that historically through the Resources Committee, and that would then turn that action potentially back to amber or green, depending on what we agreed. But I do think we should, if we don't deliver, we should allow those actions to stay red to the end of the year, and we know what didn't deliver, and then we can learn on it and understand so that we don't continuously set unrealistic plans. So I do expect us to see some red, and we have regularly discussed red, particularly around the Development Control Committee and that world historically. But that did result in corrective actions and did result in the reduction of the backlog. So I do think that process works, but it's right to keep testing it with us. Thank you.
Jackie.
I was pleased to see the youth engagement programme in the business plan, bearing in mind, all the things that we spoke about at Glaramara involving sort of young people from deprived communities. So I look forward to that moving on. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Mark.
I'm always a bit confused about where the business plan stops and the MTFS starts, but the key point I wanted to make was about the capital programme. So we've got 5 million of funds to spend on CapEx in the next 3 years. So in the business plan, we've got the opportunity to be really bold, to do some really imaginative, far-sighted, possibly entrepreneurial sort of investments. And it would be good to see early stage thinking about what the art of the possible is in that regard.
So that's a really valuable point. And of course, all the way up until 2 weeks or so ago, we were having to work on the assumption that, or without the certainty around that capital, the certainty around that capital's come quite late in the day. What we need to do now is effectively we'll have to bring an updated budget to members later in the year, and some proposals of how we're going to deploy that capital over certainly this year, but equally into the second and third years. What you then should expect to see, Mark, is some proposals come forward that influence and alter both the budget and the MTFS, but then are reflected in the business plan as well.
Which I think probably takes us on to the next item quite quickly, rather usefully, unless there's anything else that anyone wants to raise or comment on. Other than that, I think one thing I did particularly sort of pick up at the end of the report, the in-year changes to the business plan. We recognise that after the business plan has been finalised, circumstances outside of our control may significantly impact on our ability to deliver some areas of planned work. I mean, you touched on that, Graham and Gavin just now. Just thinking about the uncertainties of the world outside us at the moment. There may be other factors, external factors that impact our work that will require some readjustment as a result. But we'll keep our fingers crossed that we can proceed as close to our business plan as we possibly can. So thank you everybody for your previous input into this discussion, and particularly the work of the Resources Committee. Thanks to Catherine Slater, who's I think the author of the paper, who's hiding somewhere at the back. I think you should get a lot of credit for this because it's been a big task. And also thanks to Ben and Pete and other members of the team who have been involved. All that said, we need to turn to the recommendation. So the recommendations you will have seen is to approve the 2026-27 business plan shown in Annex 2 and the key corporate and business plan risks shown in Annex 4, subject to any amendments arising from today's meeting and resource considerations during the service planning process. B, that we delegate authority to the Chief Executive to make any final changes to the business plan and risk document before they're published. Is everybody happy to approve that recommendation? Yep. Thank you. It's 11:10. We've been going about an hour, so I suggest we take a 10-minute break now. Come back in, say, 10 minutes.
Yes. Yeah.
Right, well, moving on to our next item, item 15, which is the MTFS and 2026-27 budget. And in presenting the paper, look to my left, that we need to translate MTFS for Juliet and others.
Medium-term financial strategy, yes. Okay, well, thank you again, members. I'll resist the urge to do too much detail in my introduction and we can move into questions. The headline ones I'm sure I'll be capable of answering, and anything more technical I can defer to Pete on my left, obviously. But the takeaway messages as we present our MTFS is, given the prognosis or the outlook that we thought we might be facing in the summer and the early autumn, this is a much better position that presents itself, largely reflected by receiving certainty on National Park grant, at least for next year, and much more so driven by certainty, or rather indicated certainty, around capital grant to support our revenue grant in the coming years. So the takeaways for this for the budget in the medium-term financial strategy at a headline level is, thanks to that certainty, and although it's disappointing to receive flat cash grant settlements in an inflationary environment, I think we'd probably all acknowledge that that could be worse given the public finances, and the allocation of capital monies each year extremely welcome, and has helped in a roundabout way take some pressure off the revenue budget in any case. So the headlines that we put before you are best summarised on table 1 within the report. Which, as members will see, we have effectively now got a balanced revenue budget for the first 3 years of our 5-year MTFS, and then a fairly significant savings requirement in years 4 and 5 of the MTFS. In essence, a balanced budget for the first 3 years and the requirement to find £800,000 worth of savings in year 4, rising to £1 million worth of savings in years 5. That rather dramatic swing is largely driven by 2 factors, effectively. One is not assuming the continuation of a DEFRA capital grant in years 4 and 5, because we haven't been given any certainty in that area from DEFRA. What we've been told is that we can be certain of 1.5 million in the next year, and that should be taken as the indicative settlement on the capital side for years 2 and 3. But they've said you should make no assumptions on capital in years 4 and 5. Because we are now increasingly seeking to capitalise as much as the revenue budget as we can under accounting standards, and that's acceptable to both DEFRA and Grant Thornton, our auditors, the removal of those capital resources in years 4 and 5 then starts to have a knock-on impact on the revenue budget. So that's the first factor that's driving that significant swing. The second factor is a big change to our financial position over the winter months was the triennial valuation on the pension fund and the reduction in contributions that we need to make into our pension fund. Again, clue in the title, that is a triennial valuation, so it is valid and it sets our contributions for the next 3 years. We haven't assumed that those contributions will remain as low in years 4 and 5. We've assumed that they would return to something more like the levels we've been paying in recent years. And the third and final factor obviously affecting that deficit is an assumption throughout of a flat cash revenue settlement in a broadly inflationary environment. Inflation assumptions around all the key inputs, whether that's salaries, whether that's supplies and services, all the expenditure sides subject to inflation, but that core line of revenue support grant remaining static. So as I say, that produces an overall position of a balanced revenue budget projected for the first 3 years, and then some fairly sizable savings anticipated in years 4 and 5, or at least sizable relative to our own budgets. I know for some of you that sit on other local authorities, these probably don't look quite as dramatic in terms of the savings requirements needed. Final point I'll make is on that capital budget, and it's just to reiterate the point that Mark said. We have now made an assumption that we'll receive 1.5 million of capital funding. You'll see in the capital table towards the end of the report, there's about £500,000 of that still to be allocated for the forthcoming year. About 1 million of it can be used on the pre-existing proposed capital programme. So there's 500,000 still to be allocated. So that's the budget update that we'll need to bring later in the year that I referenced during the business plan discussion. and that rises up to sort of 700,000 and then £1 million of unallocated capital in years 2 and 3. So some really welcome and positive conversations to have about how we use that unallocated capital resource in years 1, 2 and 3 of this MTFS. I think that's probably all I need to say. Tiffany, again, I think Jim probably wants to reflect on the conversation that was held at Resources Committee and welcome questions across the board for me, Jim and Pete.
Jim.
Thank you very much. First of all, to Pete and the team, thank you very much for all the hard work that's gone into setting the budget, and all the officers and the teams for offering up balanced budgets within their units. I know it's no small task to do that. It is welcome that we weren't at very short notice faced with yet again another cut in our budget in real terms, although flat cash is a cut. At least it's what we had been anticipating. I think there's a few things. We just reinforcing the point, I think how we manage the next 3 years is really important, and it's much the legacy for the people we leave who are here in year 4 onwards, because we mustn't get the organisation used to running with this extra cash. So we're in discussions already about how we make sure any projects we do with the additional capital are ring fenced in a way that it comes to an end at the end of year 3. And I think things could well be worse, because you know, we felt very comfortable with the pension a few weeks ago and didn't think that would be. Well, that's significantly changed over a matter of 3 weeks. So we've got to be prepared for some significant shocks, I think, by year 3 onwards. So the second point that I bring is an interesting balance. Last year we invested our additional capital in solar, some of which will be finished off very shortly out here. That's looking like a really good decision. That will help us a lot, because as a business we're not as protected from the energy shocks as we are as consumers. So those are good. But this time DEFRA have set us the challenge of balancing helping ourselves financially, but also doing good for nature. So we've got an interesting balance, and I'm expecting us to work very hard on that over the next couple of months, and then for some of the projects to come back to the Resources Committee or the Resources meeting. And I trail that because some of you who are not on Resources might like to join that meeting nearer the time to understand some of the discussions, and you'd be very welcome. But yes, good to have a budget. Just watch for that big drop in 3 years, and a lot of work for the team to do over the next 2 or 3 months to get ourselves well positioned for what's a little bit of certainty from government for a change. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? No? Silence the room between you.
Always more questions when the deficits look more squarey in the immediate year, aren't there? So.
Right. Well, I'll resist the temptation of diving into the paper and asking any awkward questions, which I must have, but I struggle to do because it's very clearly set out, as I think we've all found. I would just like to reinforce the point that Jim has just made about looking ahead. I think for those who've been on the Park Authority for some time, it's an unusual position to have had the sort of support that we have had in recent times in grant aid. And as we all know, grant aid comes and goes. So we do want to be sure that in 3 years' time, the picture is still looking as strong. It might be structured in a slightly different way, but it's something to bear in mind. We don't want to get too carried away and then just fall off a cliff edge. However, I would be confident that that won't be the case, having anticipated and working towards it. But also, as we said, as now earlier on in the meeting, we live in uncertain times, so we need to be careful and alert. So if there are no questions or comments, we can turn to the recommendations. First, to note the risks and opportunities set out in the report and the basis of the preparation of the budget and the medium-term financial strategy. Secondly, to approve the revenue budget for 2026 and capital programme for 26-27 as set out in Appendix 1 and supporting annexes. Thirdly, members approve the revenue and capital MTFS projections from 2027-28 and 2030-31, including the capital strategy. And finally, members authorise the Section 151 officer to make any adjustments to the budget or MTFS in the light of the decisions at A to C. Everybody happy with those recommendations? Thank you very much indeed. Which takes us on now to further financial considerations. This time we're looking at treasury management and prudential indicators. And that's Gavin or Pete, I'm not sure.
No, I leave the glamorous elements like this to Pete.
Thank you, Chair. Alongside the budget approval, we also have a regulatory, spit the word out, duty to set treasury management strategy and prudential indicators. So again, for local authority members, they might be familiar with this. From our point of view, this is really focused on sort of larger authorities who have got very active treasury management, so a lot of surplus cash and debt that they're having to manage on a daily basis. We're not really in that position, but because our financial arrangements are aligned to local authorities, we also have to follow this, which is one of the CIPFA codes, which we have to comply with. So essentially, we have set out prudential indicators, which are all to do with borrowing, but we are essentially debt free. We do have those who have paid close attention to the balance sheet will have seen we do have some notional borrowings to do with the change in accounting to finance leases, but in terms of us actually going and getting borrowing to support the capital programme, we are debt free. So the prudential indicators, we have to prepare them, but in terms of the risk around them and whether we as 151 officer feel that you as members need to really understand our risk profile in terms of borrowing, I can assure you it is very low risk. We've just had to prepare these because it's a regulatory requirement, basically. There is this other side to this, which is the treasury management strategy. We, again, CIPFA say that we have to have a policy in place to say where we will deposit any surplus cash. So effectively we say strong institutions, not for a long period of time, in a nutshell. And again, that's a regulatory requirement, so that when we as officers are sort of placing deposits on a day-to-day basis, we're doing it in the confidence that members are comfortable with the strategy that we've set out. There's been no major change to that from previous years. Essentially, most of our surplus cash goes into a AAA rated money market fund. I won't go into the technical detail, but it's essentially, it doesn't just go into one institution, it's split across a number of institutions, but the underlying deposits are all cash based. There's no shares or equity, and we can basically call it back the same day if we do it before 11:30, I think. So it's very low risk, but still sort of tracks Bank of England base rate, give or take. I won't go into any more, probably more detail than you wanted anyway, but any questions I'll happily try and answer. Thanks.
Thank you, Pete. Mark?
Yeah, just out of interest, what is our peak cash surplus forecast for this next year?
So in terms of actual detailed projections of what the peak cash level will be, it's quite difficult because we get large sums of money from DEFRA on a quarterly basis, but they don't always tell us when it's coming, and it can vary quite a bit. So essentially, so our cash backed reserves are around about 6 million. We'll verify that at year end. So the peak in previous years would have come sort of at the back end of summer, once we'd had a full season of trading at Brockhole and the car parks, and normally that would peak at around about 8 million, give or take. I don't anticipating it being as high as that this year for obvious reasons, with Brockhole going. So it'll be around about that sort of figure. So the relevance for the treasury management strategy, I guess, is that we've got enough counterparties identified that we could deposit up to that maximum, which we do have. So that the money market fund has a limit of about 6 million. Like I say, most of the time that will be more than enough to absorb it. And then we have a 2 million limit on other counterparties. So we have facilities set up with other banks on the current account. So we've got more than enough capacity.
Yes, so just if I got that right, we're going to trend between, say, 6 and 8 million cash reserves over the year, because we've had this conversation separately, that we currently focus on reserves, balance sheet reserves, but you can't eat reserves. You can only eat or spend cash. So I would welcome seeing a greater emphasis on cash flow forecasting and an awareness of where our funds come from, where our funds go, and what sort of headroom we have at any one point in time. Because if we are going to be making potentially some bolder, more imaginative decisions on investing in the future, as we seem to be being encouraged to do by DEFRA, that sort of cash flow management and cash flow forecasting will become more important.
Yes, point taken. Yeah.
Thank you, Mark. Anybody else got anything else they want to ask a question or make a comment? If not, thank you very much indeed, Pete. Let's turn to the recommendations, which there are 4 again. But first, we approve the Treasury Management Strategy for 26-27 as set out in Annex 1. Approve the prudential indicators for 2026-27 as set out in Annex 2. Thirdly, approve the minimum revenue provision policy statement set out in Annex 3. And finally, members authorise the Section 151 officer to adjust the TMS or PRS required because of the changes to the proposed capital or revenue budgets elsewhere on this agenda. Everyone happy to support these recommendations? Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Pete. Which takes us on to proposed government arrangements. At this point, I hand over to Jim.
Thank you very much, Tiffany. Just give it one moment while the slides come up.
I get to desktop and share it. Then click on your PowerPoint. Which one you want? They're from desktop. You can always Suzanne can't see it. Because, everything is on desktop. So you share your screen, should be sharing your screen. If you share your screen, then she'll see what you're doing. Those are not the things. That's not being in the desktop.
So you can tell I put these slides together because the absence of pictures and the plain text and the typos and the spelling mistakes, etc. Just you've all had sight of the paper, but because of the importance of this and just some points I wanted to emphasize, I thought it was worth just having a quick walk through in a little bit more detail. For many months, I've been discussing, and people have been discussing the concern about our current governance arrangements. Step up to the next slide when you're ready, please, Helen. I'd like to thank Will and Peter, who joined me on this work, and also to Ben, Helen, Julie, and Pete for all the work on this. It wasn't an inconsequential amount of work and time to get to where we've got to now. Just a quick reminder as to why we were looking at this. So it's okay. Okay, I'll cover the key points anyway.
It's blank or blank. That's it.
Sorry.
Okay, so things we discussed and feedback I'd had was, because we have some quite meaty discussions in both the resources and Pearson-V, and then we come here and we sort of rubber stamp the decisions. A lot of members aren't privy to those discussions. For some of us, we lived through it at 2, even 3 times in various committees. And it also meant, because of the nature of the fact that with formal committees that are constituted under local government arrangements, we have to meet in person, which impacts on your time and impacts on the carbon footprint and everything else. What it also does is it makes it very difficult for people like Juliet who are from away, and we want more diverse, and for younger people to attend these meetings, because it's one thing to step out of the workplace for 2 or 3 hours to join us on a Teams meeting, but it's another thing to travel all the way up here and join us for a full day. And I think it reflects why we have some of the constitution we've got around the board. You've really got to be retired or involved with the local authority to have the time to do this. I know everybody's stretched, and since we went through the local government reorganisation, I know many of you have got much bigger portfolios to manage now. And also through all our meetings, our officers produce an incredible amount of material, reports and data, hundreds and hundreds of pages. So those were some of the things that I'd picked up and we were looking to address. And where we came to, Helen, if we could step forward, please. Oh, and to belittle the amount of time. So decision was to put some meatier discussion back into authority. So that would move our authority from 4 to 6 meetings a year. So we would meet every 2 months. And that's important because what I'm going to say in a minute is resources loses its ability to make decisions. So we need authority to meet to do that. No changes to development control, which Mark runs extremely well for us. Park strategy and vision would undergo a number of changes. So Peter, we're going to change the name to strategy. Just strategy, because we look at the vision once every 5 years. So we just call that strategy, but this is the big change. That becomes a working group. So it can be done online. So it continues to be chaired and there's recognition of that chair role, but the group cannot make any decisions because it's online. It doesn't have public participation or public visibility, and decisions would need to be referred to authority. What it does mean, because it's online, is any member can dial in and join. So if we've got a particularly meaty topic, you've got that opportunity to go along and join, or if you feel very strongly about something, the opportunity to go and have the debate. Resources, similarly, we'll continue with the 4 meetings, but resources will go online. So it'll be joint resources meeting, we run it online, we can't make any decisions. Now that does impact on some of our delegated authority, but if authority meets 6 times a year, we believe it can cover all the necessary decisions in reasonable timescales. And Gavin has always got some urgency powers that, with agreement from the chair and the chair of resources committee, decisions can be made more quickly. So the big changes are to those 2 committees. Rights of way, which is a legally required meeting, I understand, will still happen, but happen less often. And they'll be in the diary, but will not always be required. So that'll be a decision for the chair of rights of way to make. Governance, I think, Jackie, is a very important meeting and needs to stay as it is now, keeps us all straight. And there's a meeting of the committee chairs, which is again an informal online meeting that people dial into, who are the chairs of the various committees. That will continue to happen as it now. So the big changes are on park strategy and resources, and a slight tick up on authority. You just step forward one more slide. That's it. So when should we do this? Well, let's crack on is always my way. So from the 1st of April. So the first big meeting that will change is Pearson-V, which is due in April. That will now become the strategy meeting. It will be held online. And if members are particularly interested, because it's the partnership plan, it's the first test of the new works. In addition to the strategy meeting members, who were previously the park strategy members, other members can dial in and listen to the debate and contribute to the debate because it's an online meeting. So it's the first time we're trying the new thing. We, for the coming year, will just inject one additional authority meeting, and that will be in late January, early February, and that's part of our budget setting cycle. So resources plays an important role at that point. So we will have to inject one the year after. So it'll be 2027 by then. We will inject an extra authority. So they'll run every 2 months. So that's the timescales. Behind this then, we've also discussed what we can do in terms of reducing the volumes of paperwork that members have to scrutiny. Because to be frank, I don't get through a 400-page deck, so I'm not truly scrutinising all the decisions. So, you know, I'm sure many of you are equally pressured with time. So we've asked, where possible, we use shorter reports, slide presentations, but where there are externally impacted decisions, conservation area changes, bylaw changes, things like that, we will still require the full reports, and Julia will keep us honest on where we can and can't change our arrangements. Anything that happens externally and impacts externally will still require a draft report and a formal report, because we must give the public time to see it, hear about it and change it. But if we do something internally, I see no reason why we have to go through that process, and we can go straight to report. All that will help reduce duplication and speed things up. I would like to see, and this will be dependent on the new chair in June, that we try and firm up the timing of authority and run it as a 3-hour meeting. What we find is authority tends to vary in length, and some of you have commitments in the afternoon and have to start to drift away, and it feels like by the time we get to the away hour, we become a much smaller group. So I'm hoping that by keeping it to a very tightly defined window, it will help people manage and attend our in-person authority meeting. There's a few things I've been reflecting that we as members will need to do to help that. One is attend the online meetings as with the same discipline we've been using as in person. Really important that we still have a good representation in those meetings. Although we're not open to public scrutiny, there is always the opportunity for the public to ask through Freedom of Information Act or whatever to see, and we must show that, one, we're transparent, and two, that we've got good representation from local authorities and Secretary of State members in our meetings. So that's a big play. The other is a little bit of discipline for us. With the authority, there'll be items of business that come for potentially quite quick ratification, because they've been discussed in resources, but because resources can't make the decision. So be working through the sort of order of business quite quickly. Obviously, if people have a concern, raise it. But ideally, if someone's concerned about something, they came to the resources meeting to discuss it. But not saying don't scrutinise, but to get through the early parts of the items quick, and then to try and put on a couple of good meaty items that we can have a good discussion about in authority. So it doesn't just become a tick box. We actually have some really substantive items that the executive team wants us to discuss and get a steer on. Do read the material in advance. I would suggest, in respect to those members who do, that the officers who are presenting or whatever should assume we've read the report and worked through, and that's something we're trying to reduce the pack. Hopefully we can all do that. And as I say, do watch out for the agenda. I need to think through, as part of this process, how we publicise better, and Peter as well, how Peter and I publicise what we're going to be discussing, so that you all have that opportunity to join me in resources and go, Jim, I was really passionate about car parking charges. So when are you doing that? Because I'll join your meeting for 10 minutes because I want to be part of that discussion. So it isn't even an issue of joining for the whole meeting. We'll try and manage it such that people can join for the interesting sections. One final thing I would say is, if when you get the papers you've got concerns or issues, please, in the first instance, raise them with the chair of the meeting. I think there's two important reasons for that. One is, could be that there's 5 or 6 of us all got a concern about something. We all finish up going to Pete, who gets bombed out with 5 members all asking him about something. I think it's much better that we put that conduit through the chair. The other is, as chair, I would welcome knowing what's the sensitive issue before I start chairing the meeting. And in my own mind, I know people are really worried about this. So that's where I'm going to allow a good chunk of time in my thinking for discussion. So please do come through the chairs. Obviously, if it's a simple issue, then I'm sure the executive don't mind a quick email, but if it's something of particular concern, I would encourage you to go to the chairs. I hope to feel that we've discussed it. That's all okay with you.
Absolutely, and I think that is something that is good practice. So I think helps both the members, officers, and the chairs of the relevant committees.
Yeah, thank you. So in summary, the big change is the move of resources and park strategy and vision, soon to be strategy, online, and an increase slightly in the authority meetings and slightly more decisions coming to authority, but some good debates as well. Happy to take any questions. Matt.
Thanks, Jim. It seems like a very sensible suite of suggestions. As a member of the two committees that are most affected, I do agree there is often quite a lot of duplication in terms of debate and decision making, but that obviously members who are not on either or both of those committees will often only get to hear about stuff when it comes to this meeting. So I do think that's really useful. As someone who's also struggled a little bit last 12 months to attend all of the meetings, I think moving more online and moving more to like a working group rather than a full committee is also sensible. And I think you'll probably remember that we had a problem last month, a diary clash with Western and Furness Council, nothing to do with this authority. I think it was to do with the budget setting process having been slightly delayed by the government actually announcing its financial settlement in quite late on in the piece. So yeah, I think it's generally quite sensible to have more of these meetings regularly, once every other month, and then every other meeting or committee moving online and being a working group. Can I just ask a question regards those changes to strategy and resources? Will there still be a core membership that if decisions have to be taken, we have a similar situation on our council where we have our locality boards and our working groups, where we're all members online that for the working groups are able to attend, but that we have within that the core membership that can, should a decision need to be taken, a show of hands, that we have a core membership that can do that.
Yeah, so nobody escapes. So the core membership of strategy and resources stay the same. I'm suggesting when we get to September, we have another look and decide whether that's right and the right numbers. But at the moment, I think we won't make any changes today, so we won't make any changes to the constitution of those people. Whatever happens, we must always retain an equal split of local authority and Secretary of State to keep the boards reflective. The final thing is, even if we're all there, we can't make a decision. Because of the way we've changed it from a committee to a working group, all we can do is put a strong recommendation into authority. So that is the biggest weakness you've identified of this new process. We've lost an opportunity to make some decisions. Now, PSV made very few. When I read the delegated authority, they did a lot of work, but it wasn't about decisions that resources did. And we'll have to test it and see how that works. But we can't make decisions in a working group.
And that's always one of the limitations. It was interesting when we were doing the interviews for the new independent Secretary of State appointments. And there was a big issue generally because so many national parks were recruiting from across the country, and people from different places were taking an interest. I mean, Julie, it's a good example of somebody who lives considerably further south. And we want the flexibility of being able to attract good members from wherever, although obviously members that have got a local knowledge is particularly valuable. But under current legislation, you can't make those decisions unless you are meeting in person. Gabrielle Edwards, she was the Deputy Director of DEFRA at the time, who was chairing the interview panel, was reasonably confident that in a year or two time, legislation would be passed that would enable us to make decisions offline. But it's one of the reasons that this proposes a sort of hybrid arrangement is because we haven't got that total flexibility. So it's a way of trying to give ourselves greater flexibility, whilst at the same time ensuring that we fulfil all our legal requirements and responsibilities. Gavin and I have got
Just to reiterate again, those working groups won't be able to make decisions. That's a matter of fact. But crucially, they can make recommendations to authority, as Jim says, and I envisage them working much like our current away hours currently happen. There's still an opportunity to provide input, advice, guidance, policy support to your officer team, who then work that up for future paper for authorities, or factor that into the delegated decisions that we make under our own right. So there's still that opportunity to provide advice and guidance and to have discourse between your officer team and members, which is really, really important. It's just it can't take formal decisions.
Peter.
Thanks, Tiffany. Two quick points. One, to your point about the core membership, Matt. So yes, it will, as Jim said, it will stay the same with the same equal balance, and attendance to those meetings will be recorded and kind of reviewed on an ongoing basis. And the other thing about Matt, Jim said, had a request to ask the chair of any questions beforehand. I think for newer members, that's really key, because if you've got questions that on a new subject, you might want to just have a quick conversation with the chair. For my committee, I'd very much welcome you to give me a quick call. We can have a conversation about that particular subject and get you up to speed, and answer any questions in detail that you think you don't necessarily want to take up time in the entire meeting with everybody. But if you wanted a bit of a kind of a briefing before the meeting, I'd be very happy to do that with newer members, or any members indeed.
I think the other thing you could do that also is it may be that the chair of the committee doesn't actually know the answer to the questions, in which case I think the chair of the committee can either find out or refer them to the relevant senior officer to actually help with it. So I don't think we want to close the doors, and we have that line of communication, but it's just trying to ensure that the same members of staff don't get bombarded with the same questions. Thank you.
Don't have to wait until the meeting to try to answer something if you want to talk to the chair.
Yeah. Mark's caught my eye, and then travel around the room.
Yeah, if I can just challenge the title of the strategy committee. If you have to meet 8 times a year to discuss strategy, it's probably not strategy to discuss it.
Well, that's Jim and I had a conversation on this subject, and I did. An alternative is delivery. But the caveat or the pushback to that is, well, that's what officers do. We do strategy. If you've got to know.
I think that may be one of the ones if in September we look at again, because it seems that you see it to that. I'm also rather sorry to lose the word vision. I don't know how much visioning goes on, really, if I think about it in each meeting, but I just think it sort of sets the tone for some, I like the idea of a committee that looks ahead. So that's my thought on that.
Another valuable point, although a little trite, is we don't particularly have a strategy. We have plenty of strategies. If anything, we've got we're not short of strategies to debate and discuss through that forum. So it's more looking at policy areas as much as anything, isn't it?
In fact, I always thought that the committee was really called policy, strategy and vision, and always get it wrong. So I've only just learnt that.
Well,
that was incorrect.
I understand that there's some quite heated debate about whether there should be a comma or not a comma in the current title, Park Strategy and Vision. So I propose that we have a strategy in the strategy meeting to discuss the name of the future strategy policy.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. And I think this is definitely the moment to move on to Graham.
Just a quick point, really. Rights Away Committee and 3 or 4 meetings allocated during the year, but may or may not take place. As somebody who works and has to put in days leave to cover meetings as early as possible, I find that a little bit irritating and somewhat disrespectful, if you like, for people who have got jobs and work their calendar around meetings. Obviously, I have to fit in my fortnight holiday here and there and allocate it with my wife's schedule as well. So it's quite galling sometimes when a meeting's cancelled after I've allocated time to it. Is that an appropriate way to run a calendar?
That's entirely helpful feedback. Thank you. And I'll chat with Sabina about how we can look at avoiding that situation. So sorry, I hadn't picked up that feedback, so it's really useful. And we'll, if it's not working for you after Sabina and I have had a chat, then tell us again. This should work for everybody. If it's not working for people, really do tell us. Sabina, do you want to come in?
Yeah, just to say we need to bring officers into that. I think the difficulty at the moment isn't so much that as a chair I'm influencing whether meetings go ahead or not. It's whether at what point officers are able to tell us that there is nothing to discuss. And so I think there's a conversation to be had with Hannah more than with me about whether we can get the sort of longer range planning for rights of way tighter.
I always think that's good practice, actually, not just thinking about timed agendas, but also thinking about what's going to be on these agendas, which I know is done. But I think that might also help address that point, because I think you're absolutely right, Green. And I think even if, it's helpful for everybody to know what the dates of meetings are.
Yeah, and obviously, I think everyone appreciates there might be a call for a meeting to be cancelled because of some
it's something
odd circumstances, which is fair enough. But when a date's in the diary for 12 months ahead, you have to assume that meeting's going to run. Yeah, I don't want to sound grumpy about it.
No, it's excellent feedback.
It's a very valid point. Thank you. Yeah. Hands up along. Will. No, sorry, Will didn't. Doug.
Thanks, Chair. Without the facetiousness of the fact that chairs will now be hopefully inundated with requests and more involvement before the meetings, which, despite sounding facetious, is, I think, a very good thing. Hopefully this will enable more involvement and fewer silos of people saying, I'm not on this committee, therefore I'm not going to be involved. I'm not on this working group, I'm not going to be involved. It's something in other places, as chairs of other things, desperately try to get people to be involved in things they're not down on the agenda item as being a member of, because contributions, as wide as they can be, are always beneficial. But the second point, just going back to membership, for example, of PSNV or S or P, S&V or whatever, is if they want to make a recommendation, give a strongly held opinion, who's going to vote? Is it just going to be viewed as being the members? Obviously, everyone's going to have an opinion, but ...
Stu, that was one I reflected on long and hard, but ultimately, there shouldn't. It'll be how we as chairs manage it, but ultimately the vote carries no decision anyway, because there is no decision to be made. So I think it's just useful. Say you get to an impasse in the room and we've all dialed in because we're all so excited about it, and Peter's got this dilemma. I could see him saying, right, all those in agreement say yes, all those no. And all that's doing is saying to the officers, if you bring it forward in its current form, it might or might not get through. Yeah, we've got a range of views, and say in the worst case, most people in the room says we really don't agree with this. Well, the officers know when it comes to authority, it's going to bounce. So they've been forewarned and they need to find another solution. But we don't need the formal vote in the old sense. So I would involve everyone in the room, because ultimately the decision comes to authority and every member who's on that panel will vote ultimately on it anyway. So if I consider it as a guide, and it's a useful guide if people have given a show of hands.
I suppose I'm not just, I expressed it as thinking about votes, but it's also, if it's a working group, it works, and it doesn't just work in a meeting. So I'm thinking of that contribution and feedback, going back to, I suppose, to my original point, that contribution and feedback and how it works in a dynamic way and in an interrelationship way in members, not just in the meetings.
And I still think it's useful having the core group identified, because if the officers have some topic, and then my guidance would be go to the core group first, the chair and the core group first. Don't involve the wider community at that point, but it just gives a little bit of a steer. But all this we need to work through over the next few months. I probably would say Hannah Hart's not 100% right on day one, but we'll work it through.
Julie.
Sorry, members. In order to facilitate this, I need to amend the scheme of delegation and the proceedings and business of the authority. If you are making a recording that you're wanting me to record at this point, that it will not just be the core group that are voting, but it will be all. I will need to make further changes to the scheme of delegation and proceedings and business of authority. So I need a definitive answer today if we're going to go live on the 1st of April.
Do you want to keep things as they currently stand?
No.
And then when we get to a sort of review period, we can see how that works, would be my recommendation.
Okay.
You happy with that, Julie?
We'll put it on the list.
Yeah, so I've not lost you, but that was particularly relevant to come in on that legal point, so that's why I had to raise that.
It was much along the lines of what Doug was saying, and considering that we're keeping the core group, core membership, would it not be possible just to have a meeting where you could make the decision at key times, such as like the budget was being decided today? Would it be worth having that group come together after all the working group meetings and then voting at that time, so that then it was a little bit more dynamic? Julie?
The reason for the change is that in order for committees to make decisions, they must meet in person. That's a requirement of the Local Government Act. So decisions will have to be made at authority. The meetings cannot, unless you require everybody physically to attend. And if you require them to physically attend, we don't know which meetings decisions are going to be needed at. So therefore you effectively leave it as it is at the moment, where everybody has to attend all of the meetings in person. So the idea is that the working groups, the new groups that are being set up, they will inform, debate, recommend, but it will be for all members at authority to make decisions, because unless they're meeting in person, we cannot have those committees making decisions.
Yeah,
so it's got to be one or the other.
Yeah. Thank you, Mark.
I'm guessing the working group meetings, there won't be access for the public or the press as in normal committees, and it won't be live streamed or anything like that. But the opportunity will be there during the authority discussion.
It's an important point. We don't want in any ways, and I hope that was the point that you were making, Jim, wasn't it? You know, we want to still be publicly accountable.
And that's why certain decisions, Mark, will have to come to authority twice, so that people get that visibility. There will still be minutes, but they'll be brief, and they'll really be virtually an action log, rather than detailed minutes.
Yeah, just going back to the way it works on Westmoreland Furness locality working groups, we make decisions on recommendations, and the core group, you know, we need to be core rate for that. That's just the way we do it. Doesn't stop the debate being quite lively and useful. You know, we actually have funding applications, and we'll recommend whether to approve or go back or defer it to another meeting, and the amounts of money might be queried, but ultimately the decisions are taken at the next in-person locality board meeting based on the recommendations of that group. So it just means that the core members are, as you say, encouraged to attend every meeting that they're a core member of, and there have been times where meetings have dragged on. We can have members of the public or other organisations invited into those meetings often come on to present in the same way that we would have had people coming to attend. Typically, usually it's strategy, I would say, rather than resources, isn't it? So, but it seems to work at the moment, but obviously we could change it after a review. Wanted all members to have a vote.
Thank you.
People would still be able to invite guests to both strategy and to resources, sorry, the final point I was just going to make on decisions. We went back 12 months and looked at decisions on both park strategy and vision and resources to check. And if we went to 6 monthly, there wasn't an occasion when authority didn't meet frequently enough to make that decision. So we're not that dynamic a group that we need more frequent than that. I'm conscious that Chris has had his hand up for questions.
Yeah.
Thank you. As member of development control, I'm quite happy that my meeting for January has now got an extra authority meeting to take its place. That cheers me up immensely.
You'd miss us, Chris.
Well, yeah, well, it's been a long time. However, I accept these things that you got to try these out. It's well worth trying. Reviewing in September seems to be very, very early. I'd like to have a few more looks at this lollipop before we see if the idea, if you're reviewing it, is they may change it again. That's not way near long enough. I can give it at least a year, not probably 2, but let's see how it works.
I think I'm happy to accept that, Chris, but in the same way, if people like Graham's already given me some feedback that I hadn't considered, you know, if people find things, there's a particular problem crops up, I will take it at any time and review. But I think it's a good point that September was only that, you know, we just didn't want to leave it too long, given what's the word I was going to use? We're implementing quite rapidly by going for the 1st of April. So I didn't want people here to feel overbounced and not have the opportunity to feedback. But if we could just keep it under review all the time, really, I think it's good feedback to say we shouldn't change it again in September because we haven't given it long enough to try. Personally, it's going to take us all a year to adapt to it, I suspect.
I think it's a very good point. I think it's always been no reason at all why we shouldn't just have a quick health check in September. But I agree, you need really normally to run things for about a year before you can really gauge the pros and cons. But I think we've given that a really good airing, and I'm conscious that it'd been very nice to get through this meeting in slightly less than 3 hours. If I time my agenda. So can I
just one quick point, just bearing in mind what Graham was saying, that he's working and all the rest of it. If we're looking at attracting newer members, should we consider some of these meetings maybe going in the evening?
That's always something that's on the agenda. There are all sorts of pros and cons with that, but that can certainly be taken forward to as consideration. Yeah. Okay. Right. Well, if we could then at this point turn to the recommendations, which are 2 recommendations. One, that members consider and adopt from the 1st of April the revised committee structure and authority handbook documents as annexes 1 to 4, and members authorise the authority solicitor to make any consequential adjustments to the authority handbook. Everyone happy with these recommendations? I think that debate was extremely helpful. I would particularly like to thank Julie, because it's been an immense amount of work making adjustments to the authority handbook. So I think that's why we need to be cautious any sort of further adjustments that we make, because it does have a considerable knock-on effect on Julie and other members of staff. So thank you all, and thank you to the steering group that helped to literally steer this through.
Chair, could I just have a plea for an annual calendar, please?
Plea for an annual calendar.
A new annual calendar, so that as a bear of very little brain, I've got it in front of me and I know what I'm supposed to be doing.
I will join you in the Bear of Little Brain Club. I think it would be very helpful. Thank you. So thank you very much indeed. That brings us to the end of the formal part of the meeting, and we will then move into our away hour. As I anticipate, the away hour will actually be slightly less than an hour. So we will aim to have lunch by 1 latest. So thank you very much indeed, Suzanne, for tuning in. Oh, we can still stay. Oh, good. So she's still with us. I wasn't sure about this particular technology.